today we're going to kind of focus on licensing.
Yeah.
Licensing is, it's kind of been, I don't want to say an issue, but if we start thinking about the SaaS model and perpetual, I know that with any of the Microsofts or Adobe or everything else has kind of gone obviously to that subscription module, or model, not
Right.
module, but so let's just talk about that because there's some differences, especially in the digital forensic world with the licensing. Oxygen has always been perpetual and a perpetual model, and I don't ever plan on changing that, just because I think that there's a benefit too. But tell me what are some of the benefits that you see in perpetual licensing?
So without the subscription part of it, just owning the software, once you buy it, you own it type of aspect, I think it's very valuable in certain softwares. I'm not going to say it's for everyone. I'm not even saying it's for Oxygen, it's not for Oxygen or for any tool out there. But some of the problems that I'm finding with non-perpetual licensing is that we update so fast because, like I was telling you, we're trying to keep up. We have all these challenges. And when we change and we update too often, we tend to fix these new challenges, we break something else, especially something that's archaic and sometimes that you don't always see in your lab. And when you own a license and it's dongle based, or you have something that's off, that's air gapped and it's old and you're no longer paying for it, but you own it, you are able to do some really cool forensic stuff in the sense of maybe getting an acquisition, or you're processing an old database that has no longer supported, even though we support the latest and greatest over here. We forgot about some of the older stuff that had old databases, old structures that are just that I'm finding with a lot of vendors in particular out there that break old stuff when we're preparing for the new stuff. So I think perpetual licensing definitely does has a place in the marketplace for certain technologies. Like I like old imaging, the old architecture. Apple has come out with the M1 from the T2, and we got to go back to the AMDs and Intel chipsets before T2s and other things as we go through it. Some of those old perpetual licenses probably do a way better job. It may take you longer. They're still at USB 2 or whatever, but some of those even old hardware pieces that are still running do, I think, a great job in certain instances. So, those are my benefits that I see with perpetual licensing that I have come across as actually challenges as we move into the future.
Yeah, one of the key words was own, right? Ownership, because on a subscription, you really never own that software, right? It's like rent. It's not even rent to own. Whereas with if you have perpetual, you have a say dongle or even a soft dongle. You can move those to different computers, right? Different workstations that you're able to go. So you can install it on 400 different machines and just take that, drive that key on those one at a time. But then also like network-based licensing that you might have as part of a perpetual license, right? You're able to have concurrent connections to that, the number of users. Whereas I have found the subscription, especially, again, I'm speaking from the the Adobes and the Microsofts, is that you might lose all your data, right? If you don't go in, and it was QuickBooks, I think it was QuickBooks that even my wife was using it, and all of a sudden they're like, hey, so we're getting away from the license module perpetual that you could run forever, even if you don't pay the subscription or pay for that license, and we're going to now, they moved it to subscription, which you have to make a decision, and that's a lot of money that now you're going to have to pay either monthly or however you had to set up, or annually. And if you don't, all your stuff's gone, right? You're not able to have that information because it's stored somewhere else. And until you pay or log in, you're not going to have access to that. Have you seen some of that?
I have, and there are other software vendors that are like that. You either need to subscribe to it or take your data and pull it off. And if you have terabytes of data, it's not so easily to pull down. And it becomes very hard, or it's very cheap to push up into the cloud, and then, or they want to change it, but they're going to charge you to pull it down. And that model is really getting people where they can't transition to other vendors. They can't transition to other solutions because they're kind of stuck because of the cost differential on that. And I think you brought up a good point with Microsoft is you still can buy Microsoft Office, as a perpetual license, but you don't get any of the updates. And then sooner or later, you're not able to open the files, and you're in critical mass, and if you're just a student or you want to write a book and you just need a little bit of Excel and you're offline, that's great. Pay your $135, be done with it. But if you're going to utilize OneDrive, you're going to utilize and being able to share over the network. You got to have those subscriptions, and I think they kind of get you with Perpetual with subscriptions to kind of really get that guaranteed revenue generation, because now they're able to forecast a lot easier, right? And I think that's what's come down to it, is forecasting and what really is going to come in and what we can build off. And I think they've taken advantage of people as people have gotten away with the whole. And I hate to go back working from home, BYOD and COVID, but really when everybody worked remote, you can't have dongles in the office. It's harder now. We have to go to this Saas subscription model because so many things have been expanded outside the office, especially when we start talking about forensic licensing and requirements. It's just making it real difficult.
Right. So not necessarily shifting gears, but those two types of models, if we're just going to talk about perpetual and subscription, how about software deployment? Do you find it different? I mean, the deployment of a subscription base, because a lot of subscription is either cloud based or running on off-prem. You're not able to go and say Perpetual, you own it, right? If you got air gapped, you're able to go in and now install that on-prem and be able to run it, right?
I think it's a hard one, Leah. There's so many scenarios, at least especially from a services perspective. You do need ones that are air gap, where Perpetual works great because of the security, because of firewall. But when you do have a subscription and you do have some sort of SaaS deployment, you get the latest and greatest, you get the quick updates. Once development pushes out, you have that technology at your hands as opposed to downloading it. Especially as some of these vendors have large deployments, it takes time and you may not have that internet bandwidth on site and you need those updates. Or you have all these firewalls that are not going to allow that connection for that licensing to work because everybody wants to use their own ports. And I'm speaking over the spectrum of several type of software vendors that I've dealt with, that it was great to have the subscription. But then I go on site to some sort of either law firm or, corporate, top 100, and they're like, yeah, you're not going to be able to connect. Well, you have Wi-Fi. Well, yeah, we've locked everything down. Now, that 30,000 pieces of software is useless. It's absolutely useless. So, there's not every piece of software. I mean, everyone has their place, I guess, but I think you have to plan ahead and be cautious of the environment and depend on the licensing and software, what companies you're going to agree to work with. So that's an interesting topic because I don't think there's a right answer and there's not a right direction. It depends, which is a kind of a forensic answer.
Right. And so I guess there's benefits. I guess there can be benefits to both. Just dependent upon, right? You might have, you're not having to install, say, large files, or you're not going to have to download large files. If you're running, if it is completely, say, web based, or you're able to utilize that way. But how about, when I start thinking about subscription, right? Because we all pay for different. Even our CRM, it's subscription model. Hey, get a little break if you pay annually, right? Here's the cost, or pay monthly for it as you're going through on that. But if you add up, for me, if you're adding up what you're paying subscription versus Perpetual, where you're like, this year we might not be able to, say, upgrade the software. I'm still going to be able to use it and continue on with my job. Maybe not get some of those updates until, like a service provider, right? Until I can go and have a case, and I'm able to go in then and pay for a new license. But with subscription, you don't get that. On day, 365, it's done.
Yeah, and that's why I think perpetual licensing is a great benefit. I still think there's a lot of place for it. Like we talked about air gaps. You're not able to renew right away, and you still need to do something. You still need to have access to software that you purchased and you invested in. You need to open up an old case that requires a certain licensing or a certain version that's only on that software through a perpetual license. Where, like I said, the big problem with the SaaS and the subscription is they update so fast. And you're, especially in the legal side where we're dealing, we have cases that are 3-4 years old. And if you've already done so many updates and we do not have a chance to go back, we lose something if we have to open up an old case, or we have to open up an old hard drive, or backup, whatever container files that may be. That's where perpetual license comes in, because you have that, and you have that old version that you didn't have to upgrade. You left it on an old computer that had this licensing for this reason, and we're going to be looking at jazz drives, or the old type of side quest that you need. And I'm just trying to date myself with some of the hardware, but you just can't just throw that image, that equipment, and just throw it on a write blocker, right? There's some things to go through, and like us, I know I have a bag full of dongles and some old software, some old licensing that still work today. And even though that I purchased SaaS and subscriptions, I don't throw those licenses away. I don't throw them away, because there is going to be a time where someone's going to say, we're rolling down this company back, and we need to acquire XYZ, and this is where it's going to come into effect.
Yeah, and I've seen a few companies in the space that is more of starting to the cloud base, right? And I start thinking about that too. If it's cloud based in a subscription model, and your data is stored somewhere else, I think that could become an issue.
What do you mean by somewhere else? Like,
yeah, say you're doing a collection, because I know that there's some forensics companies that are have the instance that's running within their own service, right? Whether it be AWS or however they're doing that, and doing a one-off collection and paying, say, a subscription for, I get this many extractions or like that, but it's all done within the cloud infrastructure that the person who's paying the subscription doesn't own that space where that data is stored. It's actually going to that company owns that. What are your thoughts on that? Because what happens if you're like, oh man, I didn't make the payment, or I'm not able to go, and I mean, it's almost like your data is going to be held for ransom.
Yeah, not only that, but you also, depending on what your MSAs are involved, can you store that data in the cloud? Are you even allowed to, not necessarily by your own company, but by the client that you're servicing? There is sensitive data, and it may not be important to me, but that's important to them, and where that gets stored up and who has access to that. Because when you store things in the cloud like that, other people still have access, whether it's locked down, whether there's permissions, but there is a chance, right? When I pull it into our servers, we can put cold storage, we can turn stuff off, and we own that area. We understand 100% who has access to that. I think there's a lot of liability that can happen when you have everything based on SaaS and cloud, where that data is being stored on AWS. There are some instances, depending on the workflow, that it does make sense. But I think you have to understand the risk that you're putting yourself and the liability that you have with your client's data, depending on that type of information, depending if it's law enforcement or it's the private sector. A lot of things can really go wrong if that's exposed. So I think it's a slippery slope. I think that's an argument to be had. There's going to be an argument that's going to fight you on this and push back, Lee. And there's other parts where, that's just the way it is. And, I don't buy it like, oh, that's just the way the industry's going, we need to go this way. I think, we need to, some of the guys, people have been here this industry a long time and have seen those data breaches and seen those, user errors of just leaving things open and people come in after them and they have access to it. And you set yourself up for a lot of issues.
Yeah, that's what I think. There's a lot of risk, right?
There's a lot of risk.
There's risk to, for those people that are, say, doing the collections for their clients. And then the actual company that now is hosting that, right? Hosting that model. I think obviously there's a lot of risk. So that I think the data storage, all of our stuff, whether if you have Dropbox or you have OneDrive or whatever storage that you have, say, a file, we've been doing it for a while, right? And what's that saying about a company? If you haven't been of something like always saying, hey, we've never been hacked, it just comes someday. It's something like that. Right?
You're just asking for. You've been around a long time. You remember there's all those, hey, it's in the cloud companies spruced up. People started just dropping because they were pennies on the dollar of how much data. Then they went out of business and they're like, collect your stuff. You have 30 days. And it's like, well, I have 10 terabytes and I have I have a very low internet speed. It's going to take me longer. We're shutting our doors. Come get your data. And that was over. There was a huge impact here in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley, right?
Wasn't that Bitcasa? Was it Bitcasa? It was like one of the first massive storage companies, even before Dropbox. I think it was Bitcasa, and they did. and there was a ton of data. I'm almost sure it was Bitcasa.
So, I mean, those chances you take, like how much do you diversify, how you're doing your data, and taking real caution of what's storing up there and how long. And there definitely needs to be some sort of retention. There definitely needs to be some policy that if you're going to push data there, it's there for 30 days, 40 days. It needs to be pulled onto off storage to hard drives or to something that's more controlled, not just owned by somebody else, right? If it's your cloud, then it's a little bit different, but you got to take some responsibility of where your data is at and understanding, the time frame and what those policies are set for.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, the on-prem. If you start thinking about on-premise, it's hard enough to control your own at times, right? So if you have your storage and your customers, you store it on servers in-house. Still you have to take a lot of precautions. And then, you start thinking now, if my data or if the collections are stored somewhere else, say on a vendor cloud, or servers. Now, not only do you have to understand the security, but that vendor has to make sure that the security is maintained, right? And again, I think that keeps a lot of people up at night, I guess.
Well, I think it does, because if you just looked in the news in the last since January of all the layoffs that we've had and company, just in the technology field, and you're letting IT teams go, and the people that understand that information know where data stored at, how long is it supposed to be there. Well, there's still a lot of risk when we have mass lays off. I'm not going to go through the companies that had them, but just in, I'm in California, and just in the Silicon Valley, there must have been 15 top rated companies that laid off between 1 to 1,000 people. It's still an emerging market. We still have a lot of, people getting jobs and switching locations. But when we do that, especially in our field, and we have a transition like that of personnel, what happens to the data that was being controlled by those people, the data that's being stored in there, the access to that information? So there's a lot of risk. So there's some things to think about of how you store your data using Saas, how you're using the subscription, and the controls that you have in place. Where you have perpetual licensing and you have dongles, it's harder to access, it's harder to manipulate it. Like, it can happen, but I think with the way the world is going and transitioning, we have to be prepared for those roller coasters.
Have you seen any difference in, say, support, right? Support and maintenance in say the perpetual world, then the subscription? Have you seen any differences in say how the customer support, or is it an add-on to the subscription model for support? Just give me your thoughts on that.
And when you mean by support, you mean like the customer support back on that?
Yeah. Like, hey, you're having an issue with your whatever software that's using, and software is subscription based or cloud based. That you maybe, hey, 30 days, 60 days, whatever the period is for that subscription, versus say perpetual, that you pay yearly as part of that, and then pay maintenance as part of the renewal process.
I would say that support when you go to subscription has gotten worse, a lot worse. Based on my experience, and I can think of 3 different instances where the support wasn't very good because it was that model. And the reason being is they could outsource the support to other areas, other geographic locations that were out of my time range or my time zone. When you had a perpetual license that was dongles, there was more of a local feel to it. And I want to say, and I'm going to be quite honest with you, it was a US based, right? There was more support for the individuals in the US. When we go to that, it goes to more of a global realm, right? Somebody more in charge, and it had nothing to do with language barriers or understanding, but it was, are we following the sun? And for a company like Haystack, we have somebody in every time zone. So it's important that we had local support, whether it's East Coast or West Coast. But now we started adding all these time zones because they could support it with where the server was because of the way the licensing was structured. I thought that was a contributing factor to the support, and I felt everything was email based, right? You no longer had those phone numbers, you no longer had that type of support. And I'm not sure why I correlate that, but that's been my experience with those type of companies that I've had. I just haven't had the best support when we've had issues. And because they have to go back, they don't understand what's going on. And sending logs, and I think it's more of a process because on the support, as opposed to some of the software that you installed locally. It's easy to, hey, just reinstall it, it'll work. And generally that was the fix. Reboot your computer, the famous fix, right? And it would work. But I think when you are pushing things out You have the unknowns of this of what is supported, how you're accessing it. I think you come into more support issues, and maybe that's what's driving the, not to say bad support, but the delay in solutions.
Okay.
So that's my perspective. I don't know how the other industry feels, but that's been my experience with that is it's inconsistent on finding a solution for a SaaS model for web-based tools as well as the licensing that goes with it.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with you. My experience with subscription, especially the support, usually, and that's why I had asked the question, if is it, hey, I'm whatever term I select, is the support generally for that term? I haven't had that experience. I've had that experience of that one. If I don't pay for additional tier support, or I don't go and do some advanced support as an add-on to that, I'm just simply queued up for whoever's in line for me to ask a question. And it might be, okay, we'll get back to you within a week. That has been my experience.
And I think that's wrong. I think we do the community a big service. If you have to pay for different level tiers of service, you put your trust into purchasing that software and running that product to support clients or to whatever you're doing. I don't care. I'm not even care if we're talking about forensics or talking about, other types of software. To have to elevate and pay for additional support when you're probably at a critical time. If you had to reach out support and Googling the answer did not solve your problem, there's an absolute, I know a lot of people do that. There's a lot of forums and you can read on, but if you have to pay extra for level 3 support, I think that's wrong. I think that does everybody injustice, and I think you're just delaying the problem because you're probably having to provide logs as you go through, and I think that their support staff is limited and they need time to do their own research. So I think it's a delay tactic. I really feel that when it's that big of a problem, it's very much a delay tactic.
So the last thing I want to talk about is, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of times people say a barrier to entry into the software, especially digital forensic tools, comes down to cost, right? So what are your thoughts on, say, the perpetual? We're just talking cost, right, where you own it, versus the subscription where you can buy it, which it might be advantageous. It might say, well, yeah, I get 30 days or 60 days of this for this amount of money, versus I have to pay for, say, that first year, and then after that, the percentage of, for my renewal. I guess give your thoughts on the cost differences.
I don't know if I have a really good perspective on the cost differences, because I found some very good perpetual licensing that was expensive, but the chargeability and the return on investment was a lot greater than, let's say, a Saas or something that, because one, terrible support, we're losing money and having to credit people back, or we're having to negotiate those delays. And then I found some very, very inexpensive SaaS ones that were fantastic, right? So I think it depends on what we're talking. When we're talking about forensics, cost does not always determine reliability. Even the most expensive tools out there does not means that it's greater quality or performance or better support, and sometimes it's worse. In my experience. So I think it's the chargeability of the tool and what the end product is kind of how I kind of relate. And I know that's probably not the greatest answer or the response to your question without probably some deeper thought, but I don't think cost is the deterrent. I think it's the quality of tool and the support that comes with it. Now, if I have to pay extra for support and I've used that support and it's quality, then it makes sense, because the turnaround was fast, and I've had good support companies with good support, and that makes a world of difference of what you pay for it or what you don't pay for it. But I would say the most expensive is not always the best, and I think people need to look at the tool and their support and just the relationship that you have with that vendor, and if you're treated like a number or not, and then relay that into what that cost is. And I think that people would pay more if they had that better touch feeling. That's just me, though.
So I guess if we look at the two differences, right, with perpetual, generally perpetual license, because it can run forever, right, if you don't have to pay, or you're not going to pay for that renewal, that might be out there. Generally, the renewal is, a lot less than the initial purchase, right?
Right.
But with subscription, it's always going to be the same price plus or minus 3 to 5% if they go in and raise it, unless you have multiple years, right? So when people bring up the point, well, at least we can budget, we understand what the budget the next year is going to be, but yeah, you might not know what the next year is going to bring, right? Because
nobody lowers the price, Lee. Nobody lowers the price.
True story. True story. So the subscription, always people say, hey, I understand what it's going to be, but I just know because we pay for, again, subscription software, all of us do, and it's never any cheaper the following year, even though it's all you're doing is paying for a new license, and if you don't, again, that's the issue that I have a lot of times with subscription, is that if I don't pay for that, I might need it one time, but now I have to pay for the entire subscription again.
For a full year as well, yeah.
Right. Generally, they're not saying, okay, you know what, I'll give you for this amount of time. Usually the term is going to be annual on that, and it's that you're going to pay at least that price, if not more, every year. And so, I mean, that's a considerable amount.
Yeah, and I've only been in once in a past life. We didn't renew. We had a really good piece of hardware and software, and was like the updates they're minimal. They're not even going to help us. Let's not even do it this year. So we skipped a year on the renewal, and we waited for this other update to come out, and we went to go renew or to update our perpetual license. They're like, well, good, there's been 3 updates and 3 cost changes. You're going to pay for every single one to bring you up to period, and then you're going to renew.
You're kidding me.
No, but there was hardware and software tied to it. They're like, yeah, you're two payments back. I mean, you don't have to, and it's still going to work for all that stuff. But if you want this update, you need to pay for this update, and you need to pay for that update, and then you'll pay for this update. And that was a model, and that was what they did, and that was rough. It's like, yeah. But it's like 14 grand for the update. For that old one, but you're going to pay until, and then each time they got more expensive because they did have an annual update or whatever it may be. Right. So I've seen some crazy licensing models that come out there, and it's and I see people reinvent themselves every 2 to 3 years because they have to go back to why they're not growing or why they're not doing this. And there's a lot of competition out there that are doing something similar. And they really need to evaluate what is that tool doing for them, and what does that support, and what does that relationship look like. And chances are that's where we start seeing some new tools and new processes come into the market, and it comes down to licensing and cost and value. So I've seen some expensive tools do very well, but they add a lot of value, a lot of good support, and a lot of feedback. So and a lot of client engagement focus. So I think you have to tie that into that licensing, and I think people will get more bang for their buck that way. And it makes everyone honest. It makes those vendors have to work harder. I know they do. There's a lot. I mean, I'm sure you invest a lot into R&D, and Auction has done a great job there. And there's got to be a cost to that. But having good support, having good people at the front line, having those conversations, and the consistency of those people have been tremendous for you guys. And I do applaud you guys that dealing with Mr. Dollarhide and some of the folks there. Keith's always a pleasure, just no matter what, if he's on training or whatnot. So and he's an old soul that's been in the industry a long time, and I value that because I can talk about some old stuff from, hey, this old phone, I got this old guitar, whatever, and we're able to kind of have that longevity of knowledge and sharing, and then that makes sense to have that support, and it makes sense for that relationship to grow.
Yeah, I think that's what's important too. Again, I've said this a couple of times, is one, the ownership of it. And then really understanding the maintenance, the support and the maintenance on that, and knowing that on day 366 that you're calling up and saying, oh my gosh, my stuff just stopped, but I have this case I'm working on. I don't have the funds yet. And they're like, okay, can't help you. Send us that check and we'll turn your stuff back on. Anyway.
Yeah, but when you have a perpetual license though, Lee, you always keep that company in your pocket. You keep them in your mind because you own it, and you're always going back to them. It keeps them fresh in mind, even if you don't use it for 6 months, 8 months. Like, hey, I still have that dongle. It's a perpetual license. I own it, and in this case, I can go work with them because I own it, and they're going to support me, and they're not support you. But if you do a subscription and you're done with it, you're just you're kind of lost.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, all right, well, yeah, we'll talk to you. We'll talk to you again. So
excellent. I may find a new solution. So
true. That's exactly right. Exactly. So excellent. Well, Renee, I appreciate you jumping on talking about the professional licensing and subscription stuff and kind of how you guys do it at Haystack. But I do appreciate the time.
Always a pleasure to catch up with you, Lee. Hopefully everything's going well. Wish you guys the very best, and anytime to have a conversation.
Awesome. I do appreciate it. Thank you very much, man.